Hi, welcome to Breaking Bio. I'm Morgan Jackson, a PhD student at the University of Guelph.
Hi, I'm Stephen Hamill, a postdoc at the University of Southern California, Los Angeles.
And this is episode 72 of the Breaking Bio podcast, and today we're joined by Paige Brown Jarreau, who is a PhD candidate at Louisiana State University. Thanks for coming on the show this week, Paige. Do you want to tell everybody at home a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a PhD student at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, and I'm studying mass communication. And I'm in my final year of a PhD program, and I guess we'll talk a little bit later, but I'm studying science blogging. And my background is I was a master's student in biological engineering, so I transferred I moved out of the sciences into science communication and the study of it.
So mass communication, that's really just all Marshall McLuhan, right? That's all you guys read all day?
What's that?
Mass communication, it's all just Marshall McLuhan, right?
Oh, yeah.
Cool. Well, we might as well start there at the beginning. So you said you had a background in biological engineering. So how did you go from biological engineering into professional SciComm?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a circuitous or haphazard route into mass communication. So actually I was in a PhD program in St. Louis in biomedical engineering for a year. And during that time I ended up somehow being the person that was assigned to do all the writing of all the manuscripts for all the other PhD students, and I spent a lot of time writing, and I realized I really liked it, perhaps more than being in the lab. So, and I started a blog at that time at Nature Network, which now has turned into SciLogs pretty much. So I kind of started blogging and I was doing a lot of writing, and I don't know, thought maybe I could do this instead of making nanoparticles in the lab all day. And also my professor that was at St. Louis left, kind of the whole deal, like my major professor, the only one that I really wanted to work with, moved to a different university. And so I was like, oh, kind of had an existential crisis, moved back to Louisiana, because that's where my boyfriend at the time was from. So we moved back down. I started some classes in the journalism school, and it just turned into, hey, I'll apply for the PhD program.
So, people debate whether having a science background is useful or important for science communication and science journalism in general. With your having a science background, how do you feel about the matter?
Oh, having a background in science for doing science journalism or writing? Is that what you're saying?
SciComm, sci-journalism. Is it necessary? Is it useful?
I mean, I would think it would be really useful. Well, I mean, I think there's two sides to it. Sometimes I was also a PR writer, science, doing some of the research communications at LSU for a time. And I know, sometimes you go into a meeting with a scientist to write about the research. It can be both good and bad, Like sometimes a little bit too much arguing with you, and you don't have to try as hard to try to translate it back. But I mean, I think it's really useful.
That's good. I mean, that's the general idea that we've heard over and over again, is the science background does contribute. You may be able to get away with it if you work hard enough and do a lot of background research for each story, but generally it seems like it's a very helpful skill or life skill, I suppose. Science of life skill? I don't know, it should be. Anyways, life skill to have.
Well, there are people who argue against that, right? I mean, Carl Zimmer is a great science writer, but he doesn't have any background in science. He's a BA in English, I think, isn't he?
Something like that. Yeah, I think so. Oh, I'm not saying that it's certainly not saying it's a necessity. I'm just saying that it may give you a little bit of a leg up. Maybe not for understanding the material, but maybe for finding or having connections into it as well. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just making stuff up here.
I feel like even a base knowledge is just enough to where you can pick apart a scientific paper. You don't have to have a knowledge in a specific area, but you just have the basis to even know what look like.
True. I mean, even Zimmer, who's kind of the example of somebody who doesn't have a science background, I would argue his grasp of scientific material is as good as many scientists.
Right.
His knowledge of virology alone is better than a lot of virologists I know. Like, pretty astounding.
Right.
Yeah. So obviously you can make do when you got the talent and the time.
Sorry, Paige, I've been following you for a while, and you've been doing some interesting stuff on the foundations of science blogging and, you know, reaching out to science bloggers. So can you describe a little bit about what you've been doing there?
Yeah, sure. So I basically, I think it was before the summer, but you know, you're kind of being pushed to decide what you're going to study for your dissertation. Yeah, I'm actually now I was trying to remember exactly why I decided, hey, I could actually study science blogging since I'm kind of embedded in the community. It makes it much easier to do like your ethnography type of work if you have access. You're kind of already a big part of that. Sometimes researchers doing ethnography, a big part is even just getting access to the community that they want to research. So that part of it is really, really useful. But anyway, so I decided I was going to study the practices of science blogging, and so I was just kind of dove in and decided I was going to do interviews with science bloggers. So I just started reaching out and said, hey, I've been talking to a ton of science bloggers over the summer, interviewing them. It's been really cool. And so I kind of have been tweeting out little excerpts of my interviews with people and building up to do this survey that I'm doing now, or planning to do.
So what are you hoping to get from these interviews? Being, you know, I have no idea on the anthropology mass communication side of this, no background at all. So what is it that these interviews are giving you with regards to your research?
Yeah, so basically, and it's a little bit different than this, but there's some kind of classic studies in journalism that was basically some researchers basically decided they wanted to decide, you know, how we even know about what news values are, or how editors decide what's going to be in the news and news decisions. And so maybe it was in the 70s, 80s, there was a lot of studies where, you know, basically researchers would go into newsrooms and just sit and kind of observe science, or not science, journalists in general and their relationships with their editors, newspapers, and kind of all those practices. And so I was just thinking, well, first of all, I mean, for science blogging, there really isn't that necessarily that physical place where you can go to. But I wanted to get at that a little bit. What are the practices and norms for science blogging? And so really my only resources go into the bloggers themselves and asking them about, you know, how they decide what is a blog post. How do they decide what is blog-worthy instead of newsworthy? How do they, you know, decide what a blog post is going to look like, what kind of topics they're going to cover, what they're not going to cover, all that kind of stuff. Just kind of getting at all content decisions, I guess. And if there's any kind of norms or routines that have grown out of that bloggers somehow share, just because they're part of a community that sees others' work, you know, if some kind of norms or routines have grown out of just participating in this kind of community of the larger blogosphere.
So can you give us a bit of a sneak peek? What any interesting findings from these interviews?
Yeah, well, so it's hard at this point. So I'm transcribing all of the interviews, and so I've been, you know, each one, as cool quotes come up, I'll tweet them out and just, you know, kind of explore some of those. But until I really start pulling them and looking at like how differences and similarities and kind of coding everything, it's a little hard to look at like systematic trends. But one thing I've thought has been really interesting is like talking to bloggers about how they decide what to blog about. And I feel like that there's this idea amongst people that bloggers just kind of take what's in the news already and play off that, basically. And so there's been other studies that talk about how science bloggers are dependent upon science journalists and the traditional news system. They just kind of amplify that because they take what's in the news and they maybe just add more background or critique it and stuff like that. But I found that to not really be true. A lot of science bloggers are saying they're purposefully and intentionally not covering what's being covered a lot. If they see something being covered a lot, or even if another blogger that they know is a really good writer covers something, they'll choose something different and really go pretty far like obscure literature or just anything to try to get some kind of new or different angle on something or a different kind of story that's not being covered.
Yeah, to the extent, I mean, I've done some blogging. I don't really call myself a blogger because I don't think I do it often enough. But the blogging I have done has been completely atopical. It's never been related to what's going on. It's always been, oh, hey, something is bugging me today and I need to talk about it. Or, there's some particular thing which, has just crossed my mind and now I want to write 2,000 words on it for no obvious reason. But that's been the sort of thing I've been doing, and it's always been that way. So my output is sporadic and pretty unpredictable, truthfully.
Yeah. But I feel like it sets up the system where bloggers can really start being a potential news source, a source for science journalists perhaps to write stories on. And that's another thing I've been asking. I'll ask science bloggers in my interviews if they've been quoted in the news, or sorry, if they've seen their stuff picked up by news outlets, and like, I've interviewed some really prominent bloggers or not so prominent bloggers. I don't think a single person I've talked to has never had that happen. They've always at least had that happen once, if not many times, like every week. So the fact that bloggers are covering the stuff that they're pushing towards the edges of what's not being covered already in that sort of ecosystem of science news, and then they're kind of feeding maybe bigger news outlet stories. I mean, they're the ones that are like out there searching for the new stories and bringing stuff into the news ecosystems. And I just think it's interesting that bloggers might be pushing the boundaries of what we're talking about in the media.
So if you adopted a cynical viewpoint, might you suggest that because there's a well-known decline in the amount of science journalism that's been in the major media outlets, right? The number of dedicated science reporters falling, the number of like the general personnel is just declined greatly. Do you think that if you were to look at it cynically, you might suggest that bloggers are picking up the unpaid slack, essentially?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's true, too. I think we've seen a lot of bloggers doing more science journalism type of blogging and picking that up and doing that. And then, like you said, not getting paid for it and really going to some pretty good efforts to do it. But, of course, unless they're really motivated, we can't, as a blogger, unpaid, we can't really investigate a kind of story that would take money and traveling to do like in-depth investigative reporting.
Yeah.
So that
having the backer for that would be kind of nice. I can see, why it was such a big deal for mainstream media that have somewhat deeper pockets to fund these sorts of things. I mean, you see it a little bit now. I mean, you still see a lot of these big publications sometimes putting out these, and there's new media and such. But yeah, it's an interesting problem that some of these deep-pocketed programs, you can't dive into them as much.
Yeah.
Have you looked much at the motivations and the conceptualization of those motivations for bloggers? I mean, like I know a lot of science bloggers are practicing scientists, and many of them will conceptualize their blogging as outreach, or they might view it. I mean, some probably view it as activism, especially anonymous, pseudonymous bloggers who are kind of taking on the challenges like sexism in science, for instance. Is there any sort of pattern to this view of how science bloggers look at their own work?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I really want to get at that. There's actually a few things there, but yeah. So I mean, one of the first things I've been asking bloggers, and like in my interviews, is their motivations to blog and what their goal is, and what I want. That's going to take more of looking once I start coding and looking really analyzing my data. I want to see if there's some kind of systematic differences, like you said. Are scientists having very different motivations to blog, which they probably would, than someone who wants to get into science writing. Like, say, for example, a grad student who's getting out of academia and is wanting to go the science journalism route. Generally, when I talk to them, they might be talking about their motivation is going to be different. Maybe their blogging is going to look more like journalism because they're trying to market themselves as journalists, potentially to get a job, versus a scientist who's wanting to do outreach. Their blogging is probably going to look very different just because their motivations to do it are different. But that's something I want my survey to really get at, is some of those motivations. The only problem is that actually, so a lot of previous research on blogging has touched on that, like the motivations. So that's one area where, since it's been done before, I'm trying to push towards other things, but we still have, a lot of people are still interested in what the motivations are. So it's one thing I've been actually struggling if I'm going to put it into my survey or not. Just because people have looked at it before, but I still think it's interesting. It's going to make my survey really long if I included all these things. So yeah, I'm kind of struggling with what are the most interesting questions to include. Yeah,
I'm sure that's going to be kind of tough to pare down a little bit in that regard, so you don't have, you know, a 6-hour survey for your respondents.
Exactly.
Those ones never go over well. I hate it when companies do that.
Right.
So there's been a little. Sorry, Stephen. There's been a little bit of research showing that blogging, especially in some academic senses, you know, can increase citation metrics and the number of times a paper is cited just because it's been blogged and theoretically has had a little bit more light shone on it, you know, out of the darkness that is the valley of peer review. Do you think that there's any way or risk of the blogging atmosphere getting, you know, perverted in a way similar to like the payola schemes of early pop music on the radio?
Oh, sorry. Maybe can you maybe explain a little bit? I'm not sure. What do you mean?
Oh, just how the you know, back in the days of pop music, the record labels and stuff would pay off DJs to play songs, and preferentially, rather than, you know, the stuff that people wanted to hear, it was the stuff the record labels were forcing people to hear. Do you think that may be a concern in the blogosphere atmosphere when we're getting into academic metrics and stuff?
So you're talking like Nature coming out and paying bloggers to cover papers, or?
Exactly, or, you know, it's probably a bigger deal in biomedical fields perhaps, but that same idea where, you know, here's a perk for you blogging about this paper which puts us in a good light, or anything like that.
Well, if anybody out there is listening and wants to send me buckets of money to blog about some sort of paper, fine. Like, I'm all on that. Let's go.
Stephen's ethics are all on the table right now.
Oh yeah, big buckets of money. Let's go.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I'm surprised we haven't really heard much about that that's not already been done. But
maybe it has.
Maybe it has. But yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question. But I mean, I would think, I mean, even if you talk about universities now, or any university or scientific organization, because they can set up their own blog, and many do, where they're blogging about their own papers, and then maybe hoping that if they blog about papers at their institution, and then maybe that'll transfer into more news coverage of that paper or that science. So yeah, I guess that takes, you know, bloggers being. And that's another thing I guess we don't talk a lot about is like ethics in blogging. Maybe it's kind of been a new. I mean, I know we've talked about it. I know it's been talked about, but it's maybe a little bit of a new tier of talking about building an ethics code in blogging as there has been in journalism.
Well, you know, with the ever-increasing pressure to publish and perish, and the explosion in retractions and fraudulent papers, not necessarily because there's more of those types of fraud for you as scientists, but even just because it's been more brought out into light, you know, places like Retraction Watch. I think Morgan's really onto something. I wonder if there isn't some sort of, even operating now, as bloggers gain influence in the science journalism realm, whether there would be some sort of peddling scheme, or, you know, there's going to be a high-profile case that blows out, and it turns out that, you know, some SciAm blogger was taking huge donations of money under the table, or, you know, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, I've never heard anything about that, but, I mean, I could definitely see the problems.
It's probably on the really cynical side, because I think we're probably talking, I think those metric things are like blogging papers got 1 or 2 or 3 more citations than average. I don't think it was probably not enough to warrant.
Yeah.
You know.
But you could argue that's because it's in its infancy right now, right? As it gains more power and more influence, as it almost certainly will, you know, it could be worth it to be on guard for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
conflict of interest statements at the end of every blog post.
Yeah.
This is where we're heading.
Yeah, I think some of those papers on the positive side, it's just been trying to get you know, academics or other scientists or other institutions to realize that there's value to blogging. I feel like that's been more of a push than actually, oh, it gets so much, that blogging about a paper gets it so much more coverage that we could start seeing issues.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's just too early. We need more people blogging before they start getting corrupted.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Never too early to be corrupted. Never too early.
Oh man, good luck with the IRB next time.
Again, big buckets of money sent to me at.
Oh, that's good. So let's move on a little bit. So I was going through and doing some background research on your CV and everything, Paige, in a non-creepy way, I promise.
Yeah, no, it's out there. So.
And I saw that you taught a course last year called Strategic Social Media.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Sure. So that was at the Manship School of Mass Communication. So I was basically assigned to, I was going to be teaching this strategic social media. So that's basically, we have a very large population, well, a very large group of students who are majoring in PR, basically, at the Manship School. And so that was mostly PR students who were taking this social media class, so learning about how to strategically use social media, maybe for their brand or things like that. But it was really fun for me to teach it just because I was sort of bringing in a bunch of just personal experience playing with social media, not really a whole lot of necessarily PR theory-driven use of social media, and trying to get the students to just play with it and use it to, you know, in strategic ways. So, but yeah, I just basically ran through like all the different types of, you know, social media networks and how you could use them in different ways, and best ways to use them in crisis situations or, you know, things like that, reputation management, some of those things.
That's interesting. I think it's something that you know, in sometimes a lot of students could use, you know, an idea of how to use, you know, professionally or strategically, as you put it. Sometimes the lines get blurred and things happen that maybe they shouldn't. How did the class react to the course? Did you have a lot of positives on it?
Yeah, I had a lot of positives on it. I'm teaching it again next semester, and a lot of the students really liked it. I really liked that, you know, I still have students, you know, tweeting me like this semester, like, oh, we're using what you taught us in an internship or something. So that's really cool for me. I realized in that course that I really enjoyed giving students something practical. So like I was having them live tweet every lecture, and so we started getting people from like across campus and like other universities would like, or, you know, people would stop and like watch our class live tweet their lectures. It was pretty fun. So if we had guest speakers, they would live tweet it. So it turned pretty neat.
That's pretty cool. That's got to go over pretty well with the higher ups in your university and your college as well too.
Yeah, I think it did.
Cool. Well, this is going to provide a pretty good segue. So if we're talking about strategic social media use, one way that strategic social media could come in handy is if you were crowdfunding some of your research. And I understand that Paige is crowdfunding some of her research and has been doing a good job of strategically social mediaing her way through it.
Yeah.
Can we get a slow clap for that segue? That was nice.
That was built in. I know. What can I say? I'm a radio professional.
But no, this is actually a really interesting topic. I mean, I've been seeing you tweeting about this as well, Paige. So can you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
Yeah, well, so I had seen, you know, well, I've been doing some little Indiegogo campaigns for Scilogs. We were trying to get this thing going to fund some science blogging, and those were going okay. But at some point, I knew I needed some funding for this survey that I'm planning to do, or it would be really nice to have some funding. So I saw experiment.com, but I can't remember exactly where I first saw that site. But I decided to. It looks like, I mean, it's a well-organized site. I like the look of it, so I decided to just throw up a page on there. But yeah, it's been kind of crazy. I didn't realize it was going to be. Well, I'm really happy with how it's gone. But I think that having the audience that I do on like Twitter definitely helped a lot.
So what are you crowdfunding for?
Okay, yeah. So I am. So kind of, I maybe said that I've been doing all these interviews with science bloggers. So for a different piece of my dissertation, I want to push that a little bit further. So it's great to do interviews, but they're kind of, you know, you can only do so many. And so I want to do a survey to get a larger population of science bloggers and look at maybe some difference. You know, there I can really get at differences. You know, or people who are in academia doing some kind of different practices in blogging than people who are science journalists, and different demographics, and you know, kind of getting a little bit pushing beyond just qualitative interviews, basically. And oftentimes in surveys, what's really nice is especially if you want to get a really good sample of people, and you want them to complete your survey if it's pretty long, which mine is. Then it's nice to offer an incentive for them because it will help them get to the end, and your response rate will be higher. So I'm basically crowdfunding for that. So I just set like $1,000 that lets me give $5 each to science bloggers, the first 200 bloggers that might take my survey. So that's what I decided to crowdfund for.
Cool. And you said it's going well so far. So at the time that we're recording, you've already met your goal?
Yeah, so I met my goal, and I just kind of stretched it out and decided to. I have, I think, 9 more days, so I figured all the more I can get to reward more bloggers who take my survey, because hopefully I can get more than 200 to fill it out.
So I'm going to be really unfair here and put you on the spot, because you're a successful user of crowdfunding for science, and I have to admit my bias, because I really don't like crowdfunding as a model for sustainable science funding, even though that it's been promoted by some people. And I'm just wondering how you feel about the role of crowdfunding in science and science funding.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like, I agree with you as far as if we're going to say, let's move to crowdfunding to support a larger percentage or amount of science. I mean, I don't think crowdfunding should make us get any less funding from the traditional funding models, because of all.
Some people have suggested it would,
right? Yeah. So I mean, I think that's definitely not. I see it as maybe just a complement. I see it as maybe like we can add on to science that wouldn't get funded otherwise. Maybe we can crowdfund for it instead of replacing, you know, government funding of really important research through crowdfunding. Because, I mean, if you look at, really, you have to have pretty kind of sexy research maybe to get crowdfunded. I mean, it has to maybe have nice pictures or have some kind of visual component to it that's nice.
Yeah, I looked on experiment.com today to look at all the projects, and the top category on Experiment is biology. And
yeah.
My count, there was 147 projects for biology on that site. And I looked at mathematics, and there was 1.
Yeah.
And but it's just obvious. I mean, biology has such obvious sexual visuals. You know,
right.
Like you can make such nice stories out of it. But who's going to fund basic research then?
Well, I was just going to add that biology has penises, and so that makes us inherently more fundable than mathematics.
That's
true. And there's a book.
Yeah.
Oh.
I love how you show up for 30 seconds and already have dropped that in. That's nice.
It's what I do, man. It's my shtick. You gotta have a gimmick, man. Have you not ever heard that?
Well, it works well for you.
Not going to touch that one. All right.
Are we talking about how absolutely dismal it is that we have to do this and how ridiculous it is? That we have to crowdsource our science?
Yeah.
It's, in the end, like, it's not going to work, right? Like, I actually looked at the numbers today. And so, like, NSF and NIH in the US, they fund science to the tune of about between $35 and $40 billion a year. Kickstarter, in the entire 5-year history, has had 1.3 billion in pledges. Not even just actual funded money, but just pledges. Experiment.com has only raised $1 million so far. like it's a drop in the bucket, and it's not a sustainable model for science funding.
Right.
Even if it grows to the size of Kickstarter, it's still not a useful component. Labs can't plan their students like that. They can't buy equipment. They can't. There's no way to use this as a tool in most mainstream research projects.
So, I mean, I think there's a place for it, though. Because
for everything.
See, you're the one that took it there, man. That wasn't me. But I mean, I think for small projects, it's perfect. Or for projects that are like side projects or undergraduate research, or projects that are not equipment intensive, that are things like travel or data processing or things like that. For that, it's kind of perfect, because a federal agency isn't going to fund you for something that is smaller or that is preliminary. So, I mean, I think there's a role for it. I don't want to, like, by my saying, oh my God, but at the same time, I'm old enough to be all of your moms. Anyway, so I'm old enough that I remember when there actually was money, and it was like, oh yeah, we'll write a grant and we'll get funded, it'll be awesome. And no, now it's like, we'll write a grant and then we'll drink really heavily and wait 3 years and write it again and submit it again, and then we'll get partially funded.
Yeah.
I certainly think it has its role, like you said, in small little ancillary bits and pieces of research, but yeah, I don't think we can, depend on it too heavily.
Yeah.
It's working quite well for Paige so far, though, it seems. I mean,
that's the thing. I mean, when it works, it's great. It's just, a part of me is just afraid that it's going to be an expectation that, in addition to all the other stuff, now we have to crowdsource. I don't know. I mean, also, everyone needs to get off my lawn. This is just my cranky old lady rant, I guess.
I do wonder how fair it is too. I mean, like, Paige, you've got a robust social network, but so you could leverage that to get funds, but that's a significant investment in time and effort to develop such a network. Is it fair to expect people to have to do that as well as do their science, like as a prerequisite?
Yeah, it's definitely, like you said, and the only reason I have that is because I have the luxury of that my research is some part of social, I'm studying science bloggers, so I get basically, it's okay for me to be on social media, but another scientist, like, there's no way, and even I've probably spent too much time this week tweeting out this versus, doing other things, but, yeah, definitely, and also mine is a small project that, kind of like Gwen said, the perfect type of thing where it'd be hard to get that money, applying for a grant, when it's really not that much. It's for like incentives for a survey, so that's kind of like the perfect little thing to try to crowdfund for it. But it certainly is okay.
Do you have a feeling from what you did where most of your donations came from? Like, are we kind of cannibalizing our own scientific networks by just funding each other's projects this way?
Yeah.
Or are you getting a lot of outside donations?
Actually, one of my professors at LSU kind of just emailed me, and she's like, great job, this is awesome, but she's like, you realize that when you write your paper, if you're having any science bloggers giving you money, you're basically getting money from the people who you're studying. Conflict of interest type thing. So how are you going to make sure that you're unbiased and you're, looking at your data and things like that? So, I don't think it necessarily equates to like studying drugs for a company that company pays to study it type thing. But it's social science. It's a little bit different, but it is something to be aware of. It's something that I'll definitely have to acknowledge when I write up this paper.
It could be a potential source of bias in the respondents as well. I mean, just in terms of self-selection.
Yeah.
That's true. They've got money in the pot, so now they're absolutely going to answer the right survey.
Yeah.
Well, that made things complex.
And hopefully, don't think it's not like a significant portion of my sample that takes the survey will have backed it. Really, a very small subset, and many of the backers actually aren't science bloggers themselves, but some of them are. But yeah, that's definitely something to think about.
So that's what I wonder in terms of crowdfunding science. I mean, I worry that SciComm often doesn't escape the echo chamber of people who are, desperately interested in science and scientists, and like there's a small clique, and I wonder if crowdfunding is basically cannibalizing that same audience to provide money by just shuffling money back and forth between people who need it.
I don't know. I mean, I would argue not. First of all, I'm sorry. This is your show page, so.
Oh no.
Because there really are a lot of people who are not scientists that are profoundly interested in science.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, those are also people who have jobs, as opposed to people like me that are just broke-ass writers, who would love to support. I would love to support you. I have no money, and so I see that a lot. I mean, I don't know if you guys remember when my computer completely broke down. And people actually donated online to buy me a new computer. And the majority of those donations were actually not scientists. They were just people that enjoyed my writing, which just blew me away.
Yeah.
And in terms of the audience of people that read and that regularly comment and that I talk to online, many of them are people that say, I really wanted to be a scientist, but I couldn't hack the math, but I'm still really interested. Or I really wanted to be a scientist, but boy, the money was in computer science. So I think there is a real population out there, but I do also think that it's a small population.
I'm very happy to be wrong on that, but I wonder about the source, because you're at Wired, you've been a big deal online for quite a while.
Sorry.
Well, no. Especially compared to someone like me, you are a big deal on the internet.
I've been a big deal in my own mind for a really long time.
But if I did a crowdfunding, thing, I have, 1,200 followers, but most of them are other scientists, or, I don't have that reach that you do.
I don't know. I mean, I think the other part of that, though, is that as more scientists are having to we're all having to hold our hands out to get stuff done, especially for educational stuff, that same group of people could be burnt out. It's like, oh, I'm getting hit up again.
Hence my worry.
So I don't know, but I do think that it's a larger population than you think. But part of that also is we have to do a better job of saying this is why we're worth giving your money to. And I think the hard part is that some of the structures, you mentioned Kickstarter, or for that matter Patreon, which is the one that I've thought about. I actually think it would be kind of fun to do a Patreon for science, and post your data or something. But many of those particular things came out of the arts. And so they're really focused on, I will produce an arty product for you to enjoy as one of my donors. It's really hard to produce an arty project if you're a scientist. It's like, hey, look, I plated out some stuff on a petri dish in the shape of your face. Woo!
Actually, Experiment, the platform that Paige used, it does explicitly address that in their FAQs and say, we're deliberately not producing goals and things that you can give away because science doesn't work like that, which is good.
Except that I think donors do work like that. Some of what keeps people coming back and giving is that they are rewarded.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, we are a lever-pressing species. We press the button, we get a treat. We keep pushing the button, man. We get a treat, push the button. And that's really hard to do, I think.
There's a paper: dopaminergic reward circuits and crowdfunding in science. Done. Paige, email me. We'll talk.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think we should probably start wrapping it up here. So, Paige, can you let everybody at home where they can find you online, where they can find your work online, and especially how they can find and help crowdfund your research and push that shiny button?
Yeah, yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, so I guess the easiest way to find me is on Twitter. So @FromTheLabBench, all one word. And my project is right now is on experiment.com, and it's just called Something's Wrong on the Internet. What can the science blogger do? Or what does the science blogger do?
Awesome. So we'll be sure to put up links on our website, which is at breakingbio.com, to all of this stuff from Paige, as well as her Twitter handle and links to her experiment page, so you can go and help out with her. As well, you can contact us on Twitter by searching or finding us at Breaking Bio, and you find us on Facebook by searching for the Breaking Bio podcast. And I'd also like to remind everybody you can take us with you by searching for us on iTunes, searching for the Breaking Bio podcast on iTunes. We'll have a link up for that as well on the blog. And if you could leave comments or ratings or anything like that on iTunes, it would help us out. So if you don't mind doing that. Anyways, I'd like to thank Paige for coming on this week and for talking to us about all of her work. And we'll talk to you all later.